We are just a week away from VCT Masters Toronto from beginning, so it's time for me to do my personal power rankings of all 12 teams as well as predict who is going to win the whole tournament. So I'm going to be ranking all 12 teams not necessarily based off of who I think is going to win, but how I think the quality of each team is. So for example, the team that I pick at number 1 isn't necessarily going to be the team that I pick to win the whole tournament. Same with number 2, not necessarily who I think is going to be the runner-up, but the teams that I think have the most realistic chance on paper. And then after that's done, I'm going to be choosing which teams I think are going to make it through the Swiss stage, and then choose the team that I think is going to win the whole thing. So this is the board we have today, similar to my power rankings that I did during the Americas Stage 1. We will be starting from the bottom, and the team at the very bottom of these power rankings is Wolves. So Wolves are an interesting team. They were built in the offseason to be a Chinese super team and then fell flat super early at kickoff. They then have a resurgence in Stage 1, end up qualifying for this tournament, but ultimately fall flat of being the best team in the region. So it is going to be tough for these Chinese teams to be able to go far in this tournament. With the absence of Edward Gaming, there's not really one Chinese team that we can look at and say that they're necessarily a contender, because we basically just have 3 big question marks in that region. So I picked Wolves to be the bottom of this power ranking. On paper, the worst team of the worst performing region internationally. It absolutely could change, but I do think Wolves' chance of going far in this tournament are pretty slim, especially considering they're starting their tournament against Sentinels, who do not want to go out like they did at Bangkok. Moving on to number 11, we have another Chinese team, and that is Bilibili Gaming. So Bilibili Gaming are a team that has made it to these international tournaments, and they have upset some pretty good teams in the past, most notably that Energy upset. It will not be forgotten. And Bilibili Gaming have a similar story to Wolves, but a bit more of a more successful history, but still nothing at the international level that can make me say that this team is capable of going on a deep run. They are starting the Swiss stage against Team Liquid, who are playing with the sub because Nats cannot make it, so that does increases Bilibili's chances of winning, but I think the overall chance of them winning this tournament is quite slim as well. I do think it's going to go similarly to past tournaments that this team has attended, but overall, we will see where it goes. Moving on to number 10, we have a team that I probably would have had higher if they had their full roster, but Team Liquid finds themselves in the number 10 spot. Team Liquid have honestly had a pretty decent year, especially considering the expectations that most people had of this team heading into the season. They were one of the 2 teams in EMEA at Bangkok, upsetting Heretics to be able to make it there. They end up winning against Sentinels at that Bangkok tournament and also had a pretty good game against Edward Gaming. But a lot of that was due to Nats. Nat's one of the most experienced players in Valorant. He's been in the game since 2021. He is the leader of this group. He's one of the best players in the world, very good at lurking. So missing him in this situation is pretty devastating. Visa issues continue to be Esports' greatest enemy, and Team Liquid is no exception to that. So they do have Penny coming in. Maybe he ends up being a good player for them, but he does play a different role from Nats, so I'm not exactly too confident that he's going to be able to fill those shoes. However, with the matchup against Bilibili Gaming, there is a chance that they can get it done, at least in that opening match, but the Swiss stage is generally over pretty quickly, so will Nats visa issues be resolved before then? We will see, but I do think that really handicaps them. Players like Kiko and Patatak are going to have to step up their game. Moving on to number 9, a similar story here. We have XLG, another team that is going to be playing with the sub, but in their case, they're not getting their guy back. YOU was involved in a match-fixing scandal, so he has been kicked off the roster. So they are now playing with the sub. I thought it was going to be Martin, who is their current sub, but apparently there's another player coming in who I can't think of the name of right now. Maybe that person ends up playing, maybe it's Martin, but either way, that is not the most devastating loss. It's not like losing Nats, but it is losing a pretty solid player in your group at a pretty terrible time. So that does hurt this team's chances. If they didn't have that situation going on, much like Team Liquid, they would probably be a little bit higher, but with the amount of talent that's going to be above this team, it is going to be a hard road ahead for them. Moving on to number 8, we have the Train in Paper X. Now, I am starting Paper X pretty low on this tournament. I do want to be a believer in the Train, and if they start this tournament hot, I will definitely be hopping on it. I just feel like overall I still need to see a little bit more from this team aside from a pretty good run at the end of Stage 1. They got hot at the right time. It ended with a qualification to this international tournament, so a very impressive defeat from this team that looked in shambles at the beginning of the year. But do I trust Paper X to win an international trophy? Absolutely not. So I'm going to put them in the lower half of this power ranking. They could be in a very good position because of the most recent patch. They weren't playing a lot of Tejo. And with that character being nerfed, the meta being kind of up in the air right now, Sunset coming in, this is a team that thrives in the chaos. So if this ends up being a very chaotic tournament, Paper X does have a decent chance. However, as I said, I just don't trust them at internationals anymore, so I'm putting them in the lower half because I think there are some very good teams at this tournament that I trust a little bit more. Moving on to number 7, we have MIBR. So I was debating where I wanted to put MIBR. Do I put them pretty low because they were the lowest seeded America's team, as well as being a team with 3 rookies, 1 player attending his first international, and Ospos? But that last word, Ospos, is what makes me believe that this team is going to do at least pretty well. Do I see them getting out of the Swiss stage? Not necessarily. It's going to be an absolute bloodbath to get out of it. Plus, they're starting against Gen G, a team that Ospos did lose to at the last second Masters of the year. Leviton losing to Gen G at Shanghai. So I do think that Ospos is going to want a bit of revenge there. He's been waiting a year for the chance to do it. Plus, while they do have some rookies on this team, they have been very high performing ones. Cortesia, Genom, and Verno all have looked fantastic throughout the Americas. I just have trust in this team that they are going to continue to improve. I don't think Ospos is going to want his first international of 2025 to go poorly. I think he's going to go on an absolute tear in that Swiss stage. Does it end up getting them out of Swiss stage though, is going to be the question. Moving on to number 6, we have a team that did very well at the second Masters of 2024, and that is Gen G, making their grand return to the international stage after missing out on Bangkok. Pretty disappointing result for them, but they end up making it back here with a surprisingly good performance by Foxy9 being a key reason why they were able to make it here. They still have some amazing players like Texture, Caron, their IGL and Munchkin seems to be doing pretty good right now, so this team does have some good things going for them. However, I don't see them as the juggernaut team that they were in 2024, having a nearly flawless record at internationals in 2024, only losing 3 matches really, one of them being a grand final, so that's unfortunate, and then 2 of them being in the group stage of champions. There are some players that are probably pretty hungry to win and reclaim that tournament winning status, as well as Foxy9, a player with a lot to prove, a lot of down points in his career thus far. Now he's performing at probably the best that he has, at least in region, so we'll see if he can translate that to Toronto. I do think that this team is going to have some good performances. They just have a handful of really strong players, but it's going to be that depth that gets them as far as they can go. Moving on to number 5, we have the last Pacific team to see, and that is RRQ. So number 5 might be a little bit low for RRQ. They had a very impressive run in region to be able to make it to their first international tournament. Jemkin looking fantastic, crazy guy coming in, really helped this team turn their season around. They have some great players like Monnier who have been to international tournaments before and probably hungry to prove himself, as well as some really solid players in Xfero and Cushy. So this team does look pretty deep. I think they have a pretty strong roster, but I want to see how this team is going to do at an international before I rate them as one of the favorites. Yes, they are the top seed out of the region, but as I talked about in my preview video for Toronto, top seeds in these tournaments, when they're just waiting for the Swiss stage to end, sometimes it doesn't work out for them. And RRQ, in my eyes, is a team that I could see being affected by that. They'll be waiting a couple weeks before they know who their opponent is, and yes, they'll have time to practice and relax and, get ready for the tournament. The team that they're going to end up facing is going to be a team that's already been through the Rainer. So they will already be in mid-tournament form, so RRQ is going to have a good start to be able to have a chance. So again, it might be a little bit low, especially for a top seed out of Pacific, a very strong region. But again, it's the first international. We've seen teams at the first internationals before not do very well, especially with Pacific teams. So we'll see how far they can go, but their ceiling I do think is pretty high, which is why they're in the top half. Moving on to number 4, we have Sentinels. So I did kind of go back and forth on where I wanted to put Sentinels in this power ranking. On one hand, they are the second seed out of the Americas and were able to beat G2 earlier in the playoff bracket, one of only a handful of teams able to do that so far this year, and they're a team that generally does pretty well at internationals. They have a very impressive resume on the world stage. stage. However, do I see this version of Sentinels being able to win this tournament? I think they have some players in really good form right now, John QT especially, leading his team in rating as an IGL. Pretty good work there. Zekken as well had a bit of a slow start to the year. Not that he was performing terribly, but I definitely think he was missing 10s. I think he's more used to playing without 10s now, and Narrate has improved his play as well, which has helped. And of course, we have the hype man in Zelsus, who still is a pretty decent performer. So overall, this team is pretty good, and I do think they have a chance at taking this one. If Sentinels are at an international tournament, there's a pretty good chance that they're going to be one of the favorites. They're a team that has won before and has gone on deep runs. They know how to win. However, their last international tournament did not go very well, but I think that's just going to motivate them more for this one. They're starting their tournament against Wolves. That's a pretty good matchup in their favor. Not that there isn't a chance that they get upset by them, but I don't see that happening right now. We will see how this one goes, but I do think Sentinels, especially with the tournament being in North America, are going to be pretty motivated. Team Heretics make their return to the international stage after missing out on Bangkok, attending all 3 tournaments in 2024, being the team that I think played the most Valorant out of any team that year. Just an insane amount of games, back-to-back grand finals in Shanghai and Champions, and losing both of them. A team that just seems to go through heartbreak after heartbreak, essentially the Paper X of EMEA. However, this team is still very good, and for much of Stage 1, they looked like potentially the best team out of EMEA. However, after qualifying for Toronto, they went up against Fnatic in the upper final of EMEA, and they lost that one 2-0. After bouncing back against Team Liquid in the lower final, they lost again to Fnatic. Continuing Heretics' long streak, and at this point, tradition of losing in a grand final. So I do think that this team is fantastic. They have some amazing players in Miniboo, Riens, Benji Fishy, Woot as well, who had an incredible performance in 2024, especially at Shanghai, being one of the best players in that entire tournament. This year hasn't been as good for him, but we'll see how he does in his return to the international stage. And their IGL in Boo is going to hope that this tournament is when the team finally gets over their hump. Team Heretics were my original prediction to win this tournament. I made a video before the season started talking about my way too early predictions, and Team Heretics were that pick for this Toronto tournament. However, that was based off of me thinking that they were finally going to win a grand final in their own region first, get over the hump regionally, and then get over the hump internationally. And as we already talked about, that did not happen. So this team, again, I'm not revealing my picks yet, but I just don't know if I trust them in a grand final situation if they get there. If they get there, maybe they finally get it done and say enough is enough and just lock the hell in. But if history is anything to go off of, it's going to be a tough time getting that trophy for them. Moving on to number 2, we have Fnatic. Fnatic are a bit of a weird team at this point. They had an incredible 2023, probably having the best roster that Valorant has ever seen. Leo, Durka, Alfire, 3 players that you could say were the best player in the world that year, as well as one of the best IGLs in the game in Boaster, and of course Chronicle, the Flex Kane, very versatile player there. However, in 2025, Fnatic is donning a new look, getting rid of Durka in the offseason and bringing in Kayak. And for the last time, because I get comments about it every time I say it, Durka did not voluntarily leave Fnatic. He said that himself. Literally, just look it up. He said it on an Instagram story before Bangkok and has talked about it multiple times. He did not leave Fnatic by his own choice. Stop commenting on it. Oh my god. Anyways, to replace Durka, they bring in Kayak, a tier 2 duelist player, and after a bit of a slow start to the year, he really picked up his game in Stage 1. And with Leo out for an extended period of time due to health reasons, they brought in Crashies, who has looked incredibly happy over in Europe, much happier than how he was over in LA, so I guess that's just what LA does to a person. But much like Kayak, after a slow start to the year, he performed a lot better during Stage 1 and is one of the main reasons why this team ended up making it to this tournament. They still have Boaster, they still have Alfire, they still have Chronicle, so the majority of that team from 2023 is still here. There are 2 new players, but they've seemingly brought new light to this team, and maybe that's exactly what they needed to be able to get back to that tournament winning status. So I do see Fnatic as genuine contenders. It just kind of feels like they're due for a bit of a run. They have a lot to prove right now. They haven't performed great in an international tournament basically since 2023. Best they did in 2024 was a 5th to 6th at Champs, so decent but not where they want to be. So I do think this team is going to be very dangerous. We will see how it goes for them. And finally at number 1, we have G2. I know, America's shill, America's bias, you hate every other region, why is Pacific so low? I'm sorry man, G2 are just good. Yes, with the Taeho nerf that is going to hurt their current compositions, but if there's any any team that can adapt, it's G2. People are acting like this meta is like the only one that G2 has been good in. That is simply not the case when you look at this roster's history. Maybe it affects Trent's play, but Trent is a very good player. He can figure it out on different agents, as well as their phenomenal coaching staff in Josh RT and Anders. One of the best IGLs in the game in Valen, Jonah P being one of now 2 Canadians at this tournament, going to be very motivated to play very well. And Jogmo, how could we forget him? One of the best duelist players in the world. He almost brought them to a tournament victory in Bangkok, but they just could not get it done. So that loss there, maybe it ends up being their best chance. Maybe they don't get as far in this tournament, but I absolutely think they have the ability to. So far, their only downbeat during the year was at the end of Stage 1, where they had some pretty close games after losing to Sentinels. But honestly, I think that was a good learning experience for this roster. They had to come down at least a little bit from where they were before. It's better to have those downswings in those moments versus at the international level. So I do think this team is going to go on a pretty good run here. So these are my power rankings, but what about my predictions? So this is the Pick'ems page on VLR. We're going to be starting with the Swiss stage opening matches. Gen.G versus MIBR. I do think Gen.G are the favorites for this match. However, I do think Osmos is really going to want revenge on Gen.G for Shanghai. I will say that MIBR start with the Bane and they get the upset win over Gen.G. At least I would call that an upset. Billy versus Team Liquid. I think early on I would have gone with Team Liquid, but can Billy win without Nats on TL? I think I'll stick with Team Liquid. I can actually see Penny having a good performance in front of a Canadian crowd. He is Canadian, so honestly that might work in their favor. However, Sentinels versus Wolves, I think Sentinels win that one pretty easily. Team Heretics versus PaperX, 2 teams that are kind of similar and 2 teams that weren't really playing Tejo, so that wasn't really affecting them. I think I'm gonna go with Heretics on this one. I think they start the tournament strong. PaperX should at least get a win during Swiss stage. That train is gonna roll eventually. However, I think Heretics are really gonna want to come out with the Bane. So those are my opening matches locked in. Now, who am I going to choose to make it out of Swiss? I'm gonna say Team Heretics is gonna be one of them. I think Sentinels is probably another. In my mind, it comes down to these 3 teams, honestly. You know what? I'll get a little bit crazy with it. I think if we were going like favorites, we'd probably go like Gen.G, PaperX or something like that. But I think I'm gonna go that. I think these 4 teams make it out of Swiss would make for some pretty exciting playoff games. So I'm gonna say that that's how it goes. So Swiss is locked in. Now, who do I think is going to win the whole tournament? The team that I am choosing to win VCT Masters Toronto, Fnatic. I don't know, man. It just feels like they're due. It's been too long since this team has had a really good tournament, and now we have Kayak at peak form. Crashies winning a trophy with an EMEA team would just be hilarious, honestly. If he's the only one to end up having a storied career after the end of Optic, that would just be funny. And they just have a really deep roster. Chronicle, Alpha, Year, Boaster. This team is really good, and again, it just kind of feels like they're due for one. As I said earlier, Fnatic are a team with something to prove right now at the international level, and Fnatic being a team with something to prove, that sounds terrifying to me. If I am any other team playing against a Fnatic team that has something to prove, I am absolutely terrified. So they are my official pick to win VCT Masters Toronto. Let me know in the comment section down below, what teams are you thinking are going to make it through Swiss stage, and who do you think is going to win? I, of course, will be doing updated pick'ems when playoffs start, so look out for those, as well as a couple more videos before this tournament gets started. Please click like and subscribe if you enjoyed this video. Thank you all very much for watching, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Bye! Where all the trailers and everything that we saw heading into the release of the movie looks pretty bad, but then the movie actually ends up being pretty good. But unfortunately for my sanity, that was not the case. La 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 lava.